Hello everyone. In this module of week 7, we will talk about conceptualization of academic research in innovation process. Effectively, what is the focus here? The focus is how knowledge is produced, what is the context of that particular knowledge, how are we going to ensure a quality control. So these are the certain questions which has been talked about in the so-called mode 1 of knowledge production and later in mode 2 of knowledge production. As highlighted by Gibbon in their work, the mode 1 of knowledge production is indeed a linear model of innovation, and it is a traditional way in which knowledge is created within the tight boundaries of a disciplinary and the cognitive context. Whereas in case of a mode 2, what you will find that knowledge is now being created in a more broader transdisciplinary social and economic context. So here when they talk about mode 1, they essentially talks about how it is identical with what is meant by science, and its cognitive and social norm actually determines what are the significant problems that will be addressed, who will be allowed to practice science, particularly the kind of degrees that will be granted, and what will constitute good science. And that is where the role of the quality control will come into picture. As we will discuss in mode 2, it is much more broader and have a more wider range of activities that are being talked about. The another framework which we will talk about is the triple helix framework, which has also become extremely popular, and it also highlights the kind of a governmental intervention that is required in order to ensure that the knowledge which is now being created in various academic institutions, it actually reaches. So the linkages between government, industry, university, how they have evolved over a period of a time, and what more can be done is studied in the triple helix framework. Moving forward, let's briefly talk about mode 2 of knowledge production. According to Gibbon and all in their work, and that work is easily available online, and we have given a reference for that also, it effectively talk about a very different setup of the cognitive and social norm, which are again, as I said earlier, different from the mode 1. Where are those differences coming from? First of all, the scale and the diversity of the knowledge input which is required for scientific research has rather expanded, as we talk about in mode 2. Not only that, what the major focus, if you look at it, is effectively the interaction that has now become a more prominent in the communities of the different researchers and the actors within a given research area. You will find that within a research area, if there are different stakeholders, the interaction has increased there, and apart from that, the different research areas are also interacting much more with them. Now, purely academic norms, they might prove less influential even in such areas of fundamental research as a biomedical research. So the main focus of their work in particularly is coming from the events, you can say, and more interaction amongst the different disciplines that happened during the second half of the 20th century. Headways that has been made in biomedical research, information and communication technology, and the kind of an impact that it has on the humanity has been an important source of inspiration for their work. So they talk about that it is not the purely academic norm, but it is much more than that. It is the interaction amongst the communities of researchers, and also within the area, the more interaction. So they also talk about inter-institutional collaboration, and now which is associated with more pluralistic, interdisciplinary and networked innovation system. So earlier, let us say, if you may think of early 19th century or maybe earlier 20th century, where there would be more watertight compartments, people might be working in one field or the another field, and the interaction between them was rather being limited. However, the way has been perceived by Gibbon et al., they not only look at the interaction within the different disciplines, but also between the different institutions, and that institutional collaborations become very important in order to tackle the various challenges of the 20th and of the late 20th and the 21st century, particularly in case of a health as well as that of a climate change. And innovation system which is now being perceived in the mode 2 is more network. That means the linkages that exist between these institutions is also rather large. So what are the key attributes of this knowledge production in mode 2? The first one is that the knowledge is produced in the context of the application. Here the relevant contrast is between the problem solving, which is carried out following the code of practice which were relevant for a particular discipline, or a problem solving which is organized around the particular application. So the focus in this case, as has been pointed out by the authors, is more towards the application and finding a problem that might be coming forward when we are trying to intend, or when we are trying to find a solution to that particular problem. And the application of that particular problem is much more relevant in that case. And here the knowledge results from a broad range of considerations, and knowledge is intended to be useful to someone, whether we are talking about an industry or in a government or society at a large. In fact, the authors have also pointed out that when you talk about mode 1, the terminology which you use for the knowledge creation is mostly limited to science, different disciplines of the science, and scientists and the practitioners. Here the focus in that you see is the terms also which are now being used are also maybe like a knowledge production. So the idea is not limited to a particular discipline or to a particular domain, but rather it is much more extended, and that becomes highlighted in terms of where the application would be required. The application would be required for industry, for the government, or for the society at large. And moreover, the application is not merely the product development which is carried out for industry and the process or a market that operate to determine what knowledge will be produced, but in fact they are and is normally implied when one speaks about taking ideas to the marketplace. So it is much more wider than that as such. Now, knowledge production in this case become diffused throughout the society. That is why they also talk about socially distributed knowledge. And again, once again, as I said, the application context is again related to the social distribution of the knowledge. And the research which is carried out in the context of application may be said to characterize a number of disciplines, in the applied sciences and engineering, for example, chemical engineering, or maybe aeronautical engineering, or more recently computer science. Historically, these sciences became established in universities, but strictly speaking, they can't be called applied sciences, because it was precisely the lack of relevant science that called them into being. And there were genuinely new forms of knowledge, though not necessarily the knowledge production, because they too soon become the sites of a disciplinary based knowledge creation in the style of mode 1. These applied disciplines, when you look at, do share some relevance with the mode 2, some aspects, attributes in that context of application, but authors claim that this mode 2 is rather more complex than that. It is shaped by more diverse set of intellectual and social demand than was the case in many applied sciences as such. So what they're trying to make a distinction that within the mode 1 there was this applied sciences, right? So why aren't we just talking about the applied sciences? The author says no. In fact, we are talking about much more a broader idea. The another point which we talk about this mode 2 is related to transdisciplinary. Now mode 2 become more than merely assemble a diverse range of specialists to work in a team or in a problem solving as such. Rather, application oriented environment is something which is more significant. To qualify as a specific form of knowledge production, it is thus essential that inquiry be guided by specificable consensus as to appropriate cognitive and social practices. So what do we mean by this? Here, as you understand is that the discipline is no longer the main focus. The knowledge, the application is the more important focus. And as the application becomes more focused, you are finding the different solutions to the problems that might be encountered while finding a solution. That means now you have to reach out to the different disciplines. Those disciplines now has to be brought together. That is where this transdisciplinary nature becomes, or attribute of the knowledge production in mode 2 become important. So it will develop its own. So what would be the end impact? The end impact would be that it will develop its own distinct theoretical structure, research methods, and modes of the practices. Why? Because each discipline that is now being brought together, they would have different structure. The research method may vary, the modes of practices may vary. So now when you are bringing them together to find an application, then clearly what you have is that and there might be a need, there might be a requirement that you have to now develop its own distinct such kind of structures and research methods. The next attribute is related to heterogeneity and organizational diversities. Now this is effectively talking about how in the mode 2 you are now engaging with various institutions, research centers, government agencies, industrial laboratories, think tanks, consultancies, and the interaction that may happen. So what happens that the potential site where the research will happen has also now been expanded. It is no longer maybe limited to an individual inventor in a particular university. So the increase essentially once again would require the need to build the networks amongst themselves. So the point which we talked about earlier is that of the collaboration. So collaboration has to be brought in. Why? Because the research is no longer limited to a certain places. Rather, it has extended, and the agencies which are engaged in the research has also rather expanded. The types of agencies which are also engaged in research are rather expanded as such. The next point is with respect to social accountability and reflexivity. Now, what has happened that the public has become extremely concerned about the impact and the effect a particular science has on the human life. Now, initially when we started with certain technologies, it took a while to understand the different impact. Say for example, the impact on environment, or on health, or on communication, privacy related concerns. So they were not being talked much about. And as the awareness grow about these particular factors, it becomes much more important that not only marrying and finding a solution or an application, one need to be more reflexive of these kind of issues that can come forward. So, and that means that what the kind of research team that you are now engaged with, it may not be mere the technical concern personnel, but also social sciences are now expected, required to work along with natural scientists, engineers, lawyers, business people, because of the problem that requires this. And this the social accountability has in fact now it has permeated, it has entered into this entire knowledge production process, and that has now entered from the beginning itself. Why? Because from the beginning, if you won't address some of the major social problems or the humanities problem, you may find that the later the problems may become much more confounded. As a result, there is this mode 2 reflects on and talks about the sensitivity, that is to the impact of the research and from the beginning itself. And so when we talk about this mode 2, operating in a mode 2 make all the concerned personnel, whether we are talking about researchers, scientists, to the major challenges of the humanities itself, and then they make them more reflexive as such. Why? Because the issue on which research is based, it cannot be simply answered through the scientific and technical terms alone. The result of the research towards the resolution of these type of problems which are being now talked about has to be incorporated, or the options of implementing the solution, how it will be done, what could be the unintended consequences of this kind of, let us say, the solution that we have been talking about, and hence the need to look at those from the beginning, and the idea that we have to be more reflexive, it has to be permeated, it should be taken care of within the framework itself. It cannot be something which can be imposed later to to let us say that now we know the solution, these are the negative parts, how do you deal with them? No, that is not the point. The point is that social accountability, reflexivity is rather built in from the start itself. So quality control, another aspect of the knowledge production, and in mode 2 the quality control is no longer limited to merely peer review. Mode 1, if you talk about here, the major focus through which the quality control happens is the peer review. And who are these peers? These peers are the people who have already established themselves in the field, they are being judged as competent to do this kind of a work, to assess, to check, to verify the knowledge which is now being produced. But in mode 2, the authors have contended and argued that there are now additional criteria which has been brought forward, they have been added, and the also more agencies has been involved in terms of ensuring the quality control. So the intellectual interest, the interaction, and the pool of people who would be rather involved is much more broader. Once again, what we are looking at, what is more socially acceptable. The quality is determined by a wider set of criteria which reflects the broadening social composition of the review process. So this implies that good science is much more difficult to determine because it is no longer simply limited to the judgment of the disciplinary peers, and with the fear that the control will be weaker and the result in it might result in lower quality work. So now it has much more diverse range of intellectual interest coming from social, economic and political concerns also become important part of the quality control. Another point which has been raised by the authors is that though this mode 1 and mode 2 are being seen as a distinct mode of production, they interact with one another. Specialists trained in disciplinary sciences do enter mode 2 and mode 2 of knowledge production, while some may return to their original disciplines as and when the requirement might come out. So this is again highlighting that how in the later half of the 20th century and the 21st century the knowledge production has rather moved much more beyond the limits of the discipline. It has become more transdisciplinary, application becomes the focus, the impact in terms of a social and a social impact of the application is also of a major concern. The transdisciplinary nature which we are talking about is rather dynamic. That means more and more disciplines are added from time to time as per the requirement of the specific application. Now moving on to triple helix framework. This has been popularized by the work of Eskowitz and Lesterdorf, and here they are talking about an interaction among institutional actors within an industrial economy's innovation system. So the question arises, who are these actors? As you would understand, these are the three major actors including government, universities and firms. So what is this model about? The triple helix framework, it is a descriptive construct of the components which are there. Component, like we said, government, universities and the industries, the firms, and what are the interaction channels between them, what are the functions which are being performed, and what are the benefits of those to an effective national innovation system. So they talk about this, and according to literature, the scope and the intensity of the interaction that happen among the different actors, again they are being referred as a triple helix framework, 1, 2, 3 and also 4. So what is it? Let us say first, so let us look at the triple helix type 1. So if you look at it, here you have university, you have industry and you have a government. So nation state encompass these, academia, industry, and there is between industry and university there is a direct relationship. However, the knowledge which we are talking about is now produced only within the universities and the research centers. And these three helix which we talk about, they are very strongly defined with their relatively weak interactions. And institutionally, if you talk about, the nation state encompasses academia and industry and a direct relationship between them. New knowledge is now being produced only within the universities, and what you find is that within the research centers. So this type 1 is largely viewed, one can say, is more like a failed development model, because the interactions, of course, like we have talked about earlier, the need for the feedback etc. is not being talked about. So later, triple helix model 2, if you see it, there is now the direct control of the state rather seems to be decreasing. And also, the role of the state is once again focusing on the market failure. And how can we fix it? So what is that market failure? We have talked about when we were discussing our basics of economics in module 2 as to how in case of a knowledge production there is a need for the government intervention because the market will lead to underinvestment in the resources. So if there are those kind of a market failures existing, it becomes very important for the government to step in, address those market failures. So if you look at this triple helix type 2, the focus here is to address the market failures. The mechanism of communication between the actors is rather strong, but it is influenced by the deeply grounded market mechanism. So it may be more about having a technology transfer agreement or the government funding the resources in the industry and the university, basically to fulfill the need for the address the problem of the market failure. Now, it can be this triple helix type 2 is being referred to as a laissez-faire model of interaction in which people are now expected to act competitively rather than cooperatively in their relation with each other. So when you will find that the fundings are available for the research projects, you will find that there would be a competing space, and as a result competition will become more important, and then like I said earlier, the focus is addressing the market failure. Now moving forward, if you look at this triple helix type 3, here the three actors which we have, including the industry, government and the university, they seem to assume each other's role in the institutional sphere. Not only that, it seems they are moving beyond what their traditional functions entail. So you have this kind of a spaces where there is, you can say that of course the interaction is there, but not only the interaction, the university is kind of you will say, are engaged in certain activities which may not be primarily their function, but might be rather that, coming up with the spin-offs, startups, and as a result might be overlapping, you will say, activities which are there. Similarly, with the industry, establishing R&D labs, maybe coming up with an R&D center in certain places. And when you look at the role of the government here, you also see that this is funding the research in the industry, supporting the industry, and again, they might come up with certain mechanism through which the industry and the universities are coming together, and government are also supporting those kind of an initiative. So you look at the universities take on an entrepreneurial task. They are becoming entrepreneurial in nature, in the sense that they are now moving beyond their traditional role of only creating and diffusing knowledge. Rather, the focus, like we said in the earlier section, about how do you create knowledge which moves away from lab to land or to the market. Whatever the activities that might be required, entailed, and needed to be done within that process also becomes a focus of the universities. So there would be increased in technology transfers. Universities might engage with patenting, and also not only patenting but also engaging with the industry to have certain kind of a licensing agreement, so that once again this particular focus is being filled up. Creation of spin-offs and the startups, which can be result of the both internal and external influences. So this nature of moving away from their traditional function, the outcome may be because of certain internal and the external influences. If you remember, in the earlier module, we talked about how the funding from the government sources was being reduced in the American context. If that happens, that means they are now the universities have to look for alternative sources. And one important way to do that is through the commercialization of the existing technologies, information which is there within their organization. That can be a very important revenue generating resource. Licensing agreements, like I said earlier, the amount that you will get from it more than that, the satisfaction that we will get from ensuring that the technology is now no longer limited to the lab, but has also moved much beyond and has become much more helpful to the society at large. Now, again, these activities which has been taken up by the universities, again, is within the alignment of the regional and the national specific research goals and the growth aspirations of that particular places. So in doing so, universities now, they cease to be those ivory towers which have no connection with the society. Rather, they are now much more connected with the industry and the society. And in addition, firms also develop academic dimensions, sharing the knowledge among each other, training the employees, skill levels, establishing research and development maybe centers within the universities or separately, as that might fulfill or fit their particular role. So what we see is that there is improved university industry collaboration, and how it can be viewed? It can be viewed through maybe increase in the patenting output, and also repository of the information which is now available for the transfer to the society as such, and also the increase in the university revenue from the licensing, the greater proportion of industry fund which makes now part of the university research funding, diffusion of the technology transfer offices, industry collaboration offices which is being established, government and create incentives through let us say informed trade-off between investments in industrial policy, S&T policies, and a very delicate and balanced intervention is rather created at a structural level. So your focus of your industrial policy would also be maybe how do you ensure that the industry reach out to the university, get an access to the newer information, ensure that that information now reaches to the people as such. So what you see are the overlaps. So what does it mean? It means now the actors which are involved, they are assuming each other's role, right? And they are rather a hybrid form of organization may also come up with. For example, incubators, accelerators, science park, technology transfer offices, venture capital firms, and angel networks. So you see that the agencies which are also engaged in terms of establishing the relationship and taking it forward would also increase. Now, why that need be? Because if you think from a point of view of any organization, they might be much deep rooted in their traditional roles. In order to now make additions to those roles, there might be a requirement to change the way the things are being done. So sometimes it might become difficult to make those changes within an organization, and as the result you find that a hybrid organizations begin to emerge in order to facilitate those kind of a new roles. As you can understand from incubators, where the startups which might have a linkages with the academic institutions now can be supported in that particular space. Science parks, etc., where also the universities which have an information now and they need to reach out to the industry may not be able to do it within the domain of their own organization, have now this science park to kind of take it forward. Apart from that, there is also a talk about a triple helix type 4. Here what they have added a civil society. Not only that, the arbitrators, which includes the banks, venture capital, financial institutions, intermediary organizations. So if you talk about it, the evolution or the need which has come forward to create the different type of institutions in order to support, facilitate, as they become much more prominent, they gain a certain specific form as an intermediaries, knowledge institution, civil society, arbitrage. Then once they are now being inculcated into this, the triple helix with the three main focuses of government, universities, and industry. Now we are talking about triple helix type 4. And again, in the concepts of the information and communication technology, in the context of the fourth industrial revolution, this kind of a model is now seems to be rather coming up. Now, what happened in this National Manufacturing Innovation Survey, which happened in 21-22 and was released in May 2023, what you find is that they talk about what kind of a setup is engaged with the pharmaceutical sector and in the ICT sector in India. So these are with reference to the India. So So the research surveys have concluded that in the pharmaceutical sector, what you find is that currently into traditional category of triple helix type 2, slowly transitioning towards the triple helix type 3. The major industry actors, they a major share of interaction with the intermediaries may be like an industry association. Apart from that, there are also knowledge-based institutions which now interact with the industry. And intermediaries, if you talk about, they also interact amongst themselves. Government also interact with the intermediary, and what you find is that institutions and arbitrage, they interact with the knowledge base, that is the universities and academia. On the other hand, in ICT, which is now into the triple helix type 3. So what we want to highlight that in the different industrial setup, what kind of a model may be prominent at that point of a time would be different, and also it may evolve over a period of a time. So in case of an ICT, intermediaries, they interact with each other, and industry actors also have a lion's share of interaction with the government. So when you look at major industry association like NASCOM, etc., the interaction with the government and is rather large. Not only that, the knowledge-based institution, for example, if you look at the different engineering institutions, IITs, etc., they also have an interaction with the government. Moreover, financial institutions are also come into play. Why? Because because their participation is much needed in order to ensure that whatever the outcome might be of the research and interaction, it is now taken forward to the masses. Government mainly interacts with the knowledge-based institutions, like I told you earlier. So we'll stop here with this section, and the next one we will take in the next lecture.